Developers shipped a full prototype in 72 hours using AI orchestration. Still coding solo? By the end of this video, you'll know the exact AI stack that cutting-edge teams are using right now to collapse months of prototyping into days, tools most developers haven't heard of yet. I'm standing in Dr. Kai Meridian's lab, and there's something he keeps saying that, honestly, makes my skin crawl a little. He says the gap between developers who use AI orchestration and those who don't, it's not closing, it's widening every single day. The neural port behind his ear flickers when he talks about it like he's watching two timelines diverge in real time. He'll pause mid-sentence, and you can see the calculations running behind his eyes, measuring the distance between these two groups of developers as it expands hour by hour. Here's what he means. Right now, today, there are dev teams building functional prototypes, not sketches, not wireframes, but working software in the time it used to take to write a project brief. And they're not using some future technology. They're using tools that are available right now. Tools with names you probably haven't heard yet because they're not the ones getting hyped on Twitter. They're being quietly adopted by teams who care more about shipping than signaling, more about velocity than visibility. You know that feeling when you're in a discovery meeting and the client says, "Can we see what this looks like?" And you have to explain that you need 2 weeks just to get something clickable? That awkward moment where you're trying to manage expectations while watching their enthusiasm deflate? That gap, that's gone for teams using these tools. Gone. They're generating working prototypes during the actual meeting. They're sharing screens and showing interactive flows while the conversation is still happening, while the ideas are still warm. The problem isn't that AI is coming for your job. The problem is that other developers are already using AI to work at a speed that makes your timeline look like you're moving in slow motion. And clients, they don't care about your process. They care about results. When they find out another team can show them a working prototype in 3 days, your 2-week estimate sounds like an excuse. It sounds like you're either inflating hours or stuck in outdated workflows. And neither interpretation works in your favor. Dr. Meridian showed me something last week. 2 developers, same project brief. One using traditional methods, React, manual coding, the whole thing. Estimated timeline, 6 weeks to first prototype. The other developer used an AI orchestration layer, 72 hours, same functionality, same user experience, 1/14 of the time. When he showed me the side-by-side comparison, I couldn't tell which prototype came from which method. The AI-generated one actually had cleaner component structure. That's not a productivity boost. That's a different game entirely. Let me tell you about Maya Chen's awakening moment. Maya's a mid-level developer, been coding for 7 years, works at a startup that builds B2B software. Good developer. Fast. Knows her stuff. She was working on a client dashboard, you know, the kind, data visualization, user management, API integrations, standard stuff, but custom enough that you can't just grab a template. The client needed specific metrics displayed in specific ways with role-based permissions and real-time updates. Her estimate was 4 weeks to get something the client could interact with. She'd done this before. She knew her pace. She'd built similar dashboards at 2 previous companies. So this wasn't guesswork. It was experience-based estimation. Then her team lead mentioned something called Lovable, not a household name, not plastered all over LinkedIn. But he said, just try it for one afternoon. Maya's wearing her vintage analog watch, the one on her right wrist that she checks compulsively when she's stressed. She told me she looked at it when she started, 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. She fed the AI orchestration tool her project requirements. Not code, just descriptions, user stories, what the dashboard needed to do. She described the data models, the user roles, the interactions she wanted, all in plain language, the same language she'd use explaining the project to a junior developer. The tool started generating, not snippets, not suggestions, full component architecture, front-end and back-end. Connected. Working. She watched components appear on screen, saw routing logic configure itself, watched database schemas generate based on her descriptions. She checked her watch again. It was 4:30 p.m. 2.5 hours. She had a working prototype. Not perfect, but working. Buttons functioned. Data flowed. The client could click through actual screens. Users could log in, see role-appropriate views, interact with visualizations. She sat there staring at it, and she told me later she felt this weird mix of excitement and dread. Excitement because this was incredible. Dread because she realized how much time she'd been spending on work that could be automated. She thought about the late nights, the weekends, all spent building things that apparently could be orchestrated in an afternoon. Here's what changed for Maya. She stopped thinking of herself as someone who writes every line of code. She started thinking of herself as someone who orchestrates systems. The AI handles the repetitive structure, the boilerplate, the standard patterns, the predictable logic. She handles the architecture decisions, the user experience, thinking, the creative problem solving that actually matters, the parts that require human judgment, taste, understanding of context. Her second project, using AI orchestration, took 48 hours, start to finish. A prototype that would have taken her 5 weeks manually. But here's the thing. It wasn't lower quality. It was better. Because she spent those 48 hours on design decisions and user flow instead of typing out authentication logic for the 100th time, she had time to actually think about edge cases, to refine interactions, to test different approaches, because iteration became cheap. Think of it like this. You know how a conductor doesn't play every instrument? They orchestrate. They decide tempo, dynamics, which sections come in when. The orchestra plays the notes, but the conductor creates the music. That's what these AI orchestration tools do. You're the conductor. The AI is your orchestra. You're still making every creative decision. You're just not manually playing every instrument. The specific tools cutting-edge teams are using right now: Lovable for full-stack prototyping, V0 for component generation, Bolt for rapid front-end builds, Cursor for AI-native code editing. These aren't coding assistants that auto-complete your functions. These are orchestration layers that generate entire working systems from descriptions. And most developers still don't know they exist. Here's your one action. Open Lovable. Dev right now, not later. Now, create a free account. Give it one project brief, something you've been putting off because you know it'll take 2 weeks. Write what you want it to build. User stories, features, flow. Be specific. Then watch what it generates. You don't need to commit to using it in production. You don't need to trust it completely. Just see what 72-hour prototyping looks like. See what's possible. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Dr. Meridian says, there's a moment coming soon. Maybe 6 months, maybe less, where clients will just assume the speed is normal. Where 4-week prototyping timelines sound quaint, old-fashioned. Where the developers who learned to orchestrate AI are the only ones who can keep up with market expectations. You're watching that future arrive in real time. Right now, this is where everything changes. Most people aren't ready.